At a busy airport, one family boarded their flight with nothing but excitement in their hearts. But before the wheels even left the ground, they would face something far heavier than turbulence. A moment of quiet injustice, witnessed by dozens and watched by millions. This is not just a story about a seat on a plane. It's about dignity, about respect, and about the power to demand better, not just for yourself, but for everyone. Stay with us. The airport pulsed with restless energy. Neon lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, pale glow across polished floors. Rolling suitcases clattered against the tiles like 1,000 small thunderclaps, blending into the sharp, clipped voices from the loudspeakers. Final boarding call for Gate 20. Security check in progress. The air smelled of coffee, metal, and rushing plans. Among the restless tide, they appeared, like an island of calm. David Blackfoot, tall and composed in a tailored dark suit, moved with unhurried grace. His wife Mary, elegant in a soft blue dress, smiled gently as she adjusted their son's backpack. 6-year-old Joseph clutched a toy airplane in one hand, his small face lit up with excitement, pointing at planes taxiing outside the wide windows. They weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The space around them seemed to bend subtly, a quiet contrast to the frantic pace surrounding them. Across the terminal, near the check-in counter, tension cracked the air like dry lightning. William Parker, a white man in an expensive blazer, slammed his hand on the desk, his voice rising above the hum of the crowd. "This is unacceptable. I am a priority passenger. I've flown with Starsky for 15 years. Do you know who I am?" The young airline clerk flinched, hurriedly tapping at her keyboard, trying to avoid his glare. Passengers nearby glanced over, then quickly looked away. A few eyebrows lifted, a murmur passed between a couple waiting in line. No one noticed the Blackfoot family moving quietly toward Gate 17. No one yet. Not while the storm at the counter demanded all the attention. In the fluorescent light of the terminal, two stories began to move toward collision. One fueled by entitlement, the other by dignity. And the first spark was on the moments away. The cabin doors sealed with a soft mechanical sigh. First class bathed in a golden, forgiving light, a world apart from the buzzing chaos outside. Leather seats, stitched in cream and navy, stretched wide and inviting, their surfaces gleaming faintly under the cabin's mellow glow. Gentle whispers floated through the air, murmured conversations, the soft rustle of magazines, the occasional clink of ice in a glass. David led his family down the aisle with quiet authority. Their seats, 2A, 2B, and 2C, waited like a promise. He eased Joseph into the window seat, the boy's small hands immediately reaching for the plastic control panel with wide-eyed fascination. Mary slid into her seat next to him, her dress falling in smooth, elegant folds. David, with practiced care, placed the family's carry-ons neatly overhead before settling beside them. Joseph twisted happily in his seat, lifting his toy airplane high into the warm light, making swooping sounds under his breath. His tiny blue tie had gone slightly askew in the excitement. Smiling, Mary leaned over and straightened it, her fingers gentle, her touch familiar and sure. David watched them for a moment, his wife, his son, feeling the tight knot in his chest loosen just a little. He allowed himself a small breath of satisfaction. After months of tireless work, this vacation was a gift he had promised his family, and now, at last, it was real. Outside the window, the tarmac stretched endless and gray under the evening sun, engines humming low like distant thunder. Inside, everything was softness, soft voices, soft light, soft peace. Joseph pressed his nose against the glass, pointing excitedly at a massive jet preparing for takeoff. "Daddy, look! It's like my model!" David chuckled, his voice low and rich. "You'll see even bigger ones where we're going, buddy." For a fleeting moment, time seemed to slow, a snapshot of stillness and belonging wrapped in the quiet luxury of the cabin. A world where nothing, absolutely nothing, could disturb them, or so it seemed. The cabin door had barely clicked shut when she appeared. Sarah Johnson, neat navy uniform, polished shoes, hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to strain against her scalp, walked briskly down the aisle. There was no smile on her lips, only a fixed professional mask and an unmistakable tension in her eyes. She stopped at their row, clutching a tablet against her chest. "Sir," she said, her voice clipped and cool. "May I see your boarding passes, please?" David looked up slowly, blinking once. There was no courtesy in her tone, no warmth in her gaze, only suspicion, thinly veiled beneath procedural politeness. Around them, conversations tapered into uneasy murmurs. A man across the aisle lowered his newspaper, watching over the rim. Somewhere behind, a faint click, the telltale sound of a smartphone camera activating. David reached into his jacket pocket, movements deliberate, measured. His hand brushed the crisp boarding passes he had double-checked only minutes before. He handed them to Sarah, meeting her gaze directly, not aggressive, not defensive, just steady. Sarah scanned the passes, her jaw tightening. For a heartbeat, nothing. The golden cabin lights hummed softly. Joseph shifted in his seat, swinging his toy plane through invisible skies, blissfully unaware. Then Sarah straightened. Her voice lost even the pretense of neutrality. "I'm sorry, sir. There appears to be an issue with your tickets. I'll need you and your family to relocate to economy." A cold blade slipped between David's ribs, unseen but sharp. Not rage, not yet. Something deeper, older. A quiet, corrosive shame he had spent a lifetime refusing to carry. Mary's hand shot out instinctively, clutching Joseph's small fingers in hers. Her face blanched, a beautiful mask cracking at the edges. She bit down on whatever words trembled on her lips. David inhaled once, shallowly. He kept his voice low, calm enough to slice glass. "Our tickets are valid, ma'am. Perhaps you should double-check." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to the tablet, then back to David, as if seeing but not truly looking. Passengers whispered now, the current of unease rippling outward like a stone dropped in still water. Another click, another phone capturing everything. Sarah clutched at her authority like a life raft. "Sir, it's policy. I'll need you to come with me immediately." Joseph tugged at Mary's sleeve, confused, sensing the rising tension. David leaned forward, slow and deliberate, his hands folded calmly in his lap. "What policy exactly? I would appreciate a specific explanation before uprooting my family." His words were velvet, but there was iron underneath, and everyone in that cabin could feel it. Sarah faltered. The confidence in her shoulders sagged slightly. Behind her, the low hum of discontent was building. Whispers, frowns, sidelong glances that burned holes in the back of her crisp uniform. But she squared herself, choosing the script she knew, clinging to it. "Sir, please comply, or I'll be forced to call security." Mary squeezed Joseph's hand so tightly now that the boy whimpered. She loosened her grip with a whispered apology, blinking back the sting in her eyes. David sat very still, weighing 1,000 histories in one breath. He thought of his son, of what Joseph was seeing, of the lessons he had hoped to shield him from a little longer. With a final, slow exhale, David stood, not defeated, not ashamed, simply preparing for what must come. As he gathered their things, the cabin buzzed with unspoken tension. Some looked away, some stared, and somewhere someone kept recording. Outside the window, the sun dipped lower, casting long, slanting shadows across the cabin floor. The storm had begun. They walked the long aisle like ghosts. David led the way, one hand steady on Joseph's shoulder, the other clutching their small bag. Mary followed, her face a careful, aching mask, her heels clicking softly against the carpeted floor. No one stopped them. No one helped. Whispers slid through the rows of first class like smoke. Some passengers avoided their gaze, retreating behind newspapers and dark screens. Others stared openly, curious, judgmental, indifferent. The Blackfoots moved through them all, dignity intact but bruised, like royalty forced to walk through a jeering crowd. As they crossed the invisible line into economy, the world shifted. The soft leather seats gave way to cracked plastic. The golden light dimmed into harsh fluorescent strips buzzing overhead. The scent of fresh coffee turned sour. Stale air, fast food wrappers, the sharp tang of exhaustion. Their new seats waited near the rear of the plane, cramped, wedged between a restless toddler and a coughing elderly man. The seats barely reclined. The armrests jutted awkwardly into their ribs. Joseph squirmed as Mary helped him into his narrow seat. The toy airplane clutched tighter now, its wings digging into his small palm. A baby screamed somewhere down the aisle, shrill and unrelenting. The floor vibrated under the steady march of boarding passengers, bumping bags and muttered apologies. David sank into the seat beside his family, the frame too tight for his broad shoulders. He adjusted his tie once, a mechanical movement, as if trying to straighten something that no longer mattered. For a moment, they sat in silence. The kind of silence so loud, it rattled the bones. Joseph turned to him, eyes wide, confused. "Daddy," he whispered, voice trembling, "did we do something wrong?" The words hit harder than any humiliation. David closed his eyes briefly, breathing in through his nose, out through his mouth. The cheap air tasted of disappointment. He opened his eyes, and when he did, they were cold. Not angry, not broken. Cold like a winter lake, still, clear, and deadly deep. Without a word, David pulled out his phone. His fingers moved with a surgeon's precision, tapping out a message. He wasn't texting a friend. He wasn't complaining to a customer service line. He was reaching higher, higher than anyone in that plane realized. The screen glowed in his palm, the quiet promise of a reckoning to come. He slid the phone back into his jacket pocket, then turned to Joseph, brushing the boy's hair gently with his fingertips. "No, son," he said softly, a sad smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We didn't do anything wrong." Outside the tiny window, the horizon blurred, as if even the sky itself was holding its breath. The phone rested quietly in David's hand, its screen glowing against the dimness of the economy cabin. A close shot, the message, crisp and sharp under his thumb. "Incident on flight SS-287. Discriminatory behavior by crew. I am a primary shareholder. Immediate escalation requested." No emojis, no wasted words. The kind of message that didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. David hit send. A second later, a soft vibration confirmed the delivery. Above him, the plane shuddered gently as the engines prepared for takeoff. But inside the cabin, another kind of turbulence had already begun. A few rows up, a young woman in a denim jacket tilted her phone discreetly. Her camera caught everything. The forced relocation, the tense expressions, the crushed dignity. She tapped furiously at her screen. Star Sky Bias. The hashtag pulsed into existence. A single spark in the endless forest of social media. And sparks, given air, know exactly what to do. Within minutes, posts multiplied. Short clips of Sarah's confrontation. Snapshots of the Blackfoot family squeezed into seats too small. Angry captions, outraged comments, likes, shares, more shares. The digital wildfire was lit. Meanwhile, back in first class, William Parker lounged smugly in seat 2A, the very seat Joseph had bounced in only minutes before. He stretched his legs out luxuriously, ordered a scotch from a passing attendant, and settled deeper into the plush leather. A slow, satisfied smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He didn't glance once toward the back of the plane. In his mind, everything had returned to its proper order. But hundreds of miles away, in a sleek glass building towering over downtown, a phone buzzed sharply atop a polished conference table. Then another, and another. Executives at Starsky Airlines, accustomed to dealing with late flight complaints and misplaced luggage, now stared at their screens, pale and speechless. Trending, millions of views, and climbing. Someone swore under their breath. Another began typing frantically. Urgent words bounced across encrypted channels. Flight SS-287, major PR crisis. Passenger involved as a shareholder. Immediate intervention needed. The calm, curated world they had built around their brand began to tremble. Not from the engines of a plane, but from the rising, unstoppable storm they had unleashed with one small act of arrogance. A soft chime broke the low murmur of the cabin. The intercom crackled alive. The voice of the captain, usually reserved for cruising altitudes and weather updates, carried a weight it rarely bore. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice began, steady but unusually tense, "we'd like to issue an immediate correction regarding a boarding error that occurred earlier." David looked up without moving his head, his expression unreadable. Mary gripped Joseph's hand a little tighter, sensing, without fully understanding, the shift in the air. "We sincerely apologize to Mr. David Blackfoot and his family. They are valued passengers in our first-class cabin, and we request that they return to their assigned seats at once. On behalf of Starsky Airlines, we are deeply sorry for the inconvenience caused. A hush rippled through the economy cabin. Some passengers gaped openly. A few exchanged sharp whispers. Phones lifted again, this time recording the reversal of fortunes. David rose slowly, his movements deliberate, composed, as if he had all the time in the world. He extended a hand toward Joseph, who clutched his toy airplane and scrambled up, wide-eyed but trusting. As they made their way forward, a visible current seemed to part the rows ahead of them, a tide of silent, shifting bodies. Back in first class, Sarah stood frozen by the galley. A tablet trembled slightly in her hands. Her face, moments ago flushed with authority, now drained of all color, like a photograph left too long in the sun. A supervisor in a dark blazer had materialized beside her, whispering urgently into her ear. Sarah's knees nearly buckled when she caught the words, "Primary shareholder, immediate violation report. Prepare for review." She turned her gaze toward David as he approached, but he didn't look at her. He didn't have to. Every step he took was an indictment louder than any words. William Parker, still lounging in 2A, had half risen from his seat in confusion. When realization dawned, when he understood who David was, what he had set into motion, his smug expression crumbled into something raw and ugly. He coughed awkwardly, tried to smile, then thought better of it. The Scotch glass trembled slightly in his hand. Around him, the temperature of the cabin changed. Passengers stared, not at David, at him. Their looks were not kind. Some were cold, some were disgusted, some were simply curious. In that detached way, crowds witness a fall from grace. William sank back into his seat, his body folding in on itself, suddenly too small for the wide leather chair he had once occupied so confidently. And David simply led his family past him, without a glance, without a word, without an ounce of the humiliation that had been thrown their way. They returned to their rightful seats, and for the first time that day, the first-class cabin felt right. Not because of who they were, but because justice, however small, had been served. The fallout came faster than the plane's descent. Before Flight SS-287 even touched down, Starsky Airlines' crisis team was already in full sprint. Emails firing back and forth, lawyers called in, statements drafted at midnight under the harsh glare of conference room lights. Sarah Johnson's suspension came first. An internal memo, terse and bloodless, circulated to department heads. Pending investigation into passenger mistreatment, effective immediately. She was escorted from her post before her next shift. Her ID badge turned coldly to inactive in the company database. The same colleagues who once nodded politely in the halls now avoided her eyes, whispering in corners she dared not approach. At home, Sarah sat alone, staring at the blinking cursor on an untouched email draft. The walls closed in tighter with every headline. Starsky crew accused of racial discrimination. Starsky bias trending at 3 million tweets and climbing. Passenger identified as major shareholder demands accountability. Her hands trembled against the laptop keys. No amount of policy manuals, no line from the flight attendant handbook could shield her now. Meanwhile, William Parker's world, once a fortress built on privilege and connections, cracked wide open. Someone had recognized him on the flight. Someone had posted his name. Within hours, his LinkedIn page flooded with furious comments. Clients canceled meetings. Board members issued statements distancing themselves from his behavior. Local news ran with the story, executive accused of displacing black family on flight. In one particularly brutal clip, filmed by a nearby passenger, William's attempt to casually stretch out in his ill-gotten seat, oblivious to the surrounding anger, played over and over with savage glee. William tried to fight it at first, a lawyered-up statement about misunderstandings and stress while traveling, but the world had already moved past excuses. The consequences were no longer negotiable. Back at Starsky headquarters, under siege from a public relations firestorm, executives gathered grimly around long glass tables. A decision was made: immediate mandatory training for all staff, not just a check-the-box seminar, a comprehensive top-to-bottom reformation, workshops on unconscious bias, modules on racial sensitivity, leadership accountability reviews. A press release hit every major outlet within 48 hours. Starsky Airlines is committed to rebuilding trust. Effective today, 100% of frontline staff will undergo certified anti-bias training. We are listening. We are changing. And for once, it wasn't just words. Across terminals, posters went up. Respect is not optional. New check-in scripts were distributed, reworded with an emphasis on dignity and fairness. Change, slow and painful, had begun. Not because it was easy, not because they wanted to, but because the world, and the people in it, had demanded better. And this time they couldn't look away. Weeks passed. Long after the hashtags cooled and headlines shifted, Sarah Johnson sat alone in a small, fluorescent-lit classroom, far from the polished gates of first class, far from the authority she once wore like a shield. She wasn't ordered to be there. No legal summons had forced her hand. She had chosen it herself. Diversity seminars, workshops on racial bias, quiet circles of uncomfortable truths where listening, real listening, was the only curriculum. Each session chipped away at the armor she didn't even know she wore. One evening, after yet another long, humbling discussion, Sarah opened her laptop. The cursor blinked against a blank email draft. She typed slowly, carefully. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Blackfoot, I am writing not to ask for forgiveness, but to acknowledge the hurt I caused. There is no excuse for my actions. I am committed to doing better, learning more, and ensuring no family is ever treated the way yours was again. With sincere regret, Sarah Johnson. She hovered over the send button for a long moment, then clicked. No dramatic flourish, just a quiet step forward into the person she hoped to become. The Blackfoots never replied. They didn't need to. David and Mary read the email together, sitting side by side in the cozy corner of their living room. David nodded once, folding the laptop closed, the ghost of a smile flickering in his eyes. They didn't owe her forgiveness, but they could recognize growth when they saw it. A month later, another flight, another airport, another journey, but this time it was different. From check-in to boarding, the staff smiled with genuine warmth. No sidelong glances, no demands for tickets at random. Just respect. As they settled into their seats, true first class, no questions asked, Joseph pressed his nose against the window again, laughing. The sunlight poured through the oval glass, painting him in gold. He lifted his toy airplane high, making wide, looping circles in the air. Look, Daddy, he cried, I'm flying. David smiled, resting a hand on his son's shoulder, the weight of old wounds lifting, if not forgotten, at least lighter now. Above them, the engines thrummed to life. This time, the sky seemed ready to welcome them. The plane rumbled down the runway, the world outside blurring into streaks of gold and blue. Inside, in the soft cocoon of first class, David leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting from the window to Mary beside him. She smiled, her hand finding his without a word, their fingers weaving together effortlessly, like they had always belonged there. For a long moment, they simply sat in silence, the hum of the engines building around them. Then David spoke, his voice low, steady, meant only for her. It's not about them knowing who I am, he said, squeezing her hand gently. It's about everyone getting the respect they deserve. Mary's eyes shone, reflecting not sadness, but a quiet pride in him, in their family, in the simple truth of those words. Outside, the nose of the plane lifted, breaking free from the earth. The wheels tucked inward, and the jets soared higher, banking into the limitless sky. Through the small window, the sun caught the metal wings, setting them ablaze in brilliant light. A silent promise that sometimes change really does take flight. The screen faded to white, and hope rose with it.